Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the government has launched a full-scale inquiry to discover who leaked diplomatic memos from the UK's ambassador to the US, which described the Trump administration as inept. In the Commons, MPs said the leak was unpatriotic and the culprit should face criminal sanctions. Ministers gave their backing to the ambassador, Sir Kim Darroch, but said they did not share his views about President Trump. Donald Trump himself said Sir Kim has not served the UK well. Our political editor, Gary Gibbon, reports.
The government's announced a full-scale investigation into how the unvarnished thoughts of Sir Kim Darroch, our man in Washington, ended up on the front page of a Sunday newspaper. In a series of private messages updating the government here on President Trump, Sir Kim Darroch described the Trump administration as uniquely dysfunctional, faction-riven, diplomatically clumsy and inept. Number 10 insisted Theresa May, visiting RAF Northwood today, had full faith in Kim Darroch, but she has only 15 more days in her job. Her successor may be influenced by this presidential reaction.
You know, we've had our little ins and outs with a couple of countries, and I would say that the UK and the ambassador has not served the UK well. I can tell you that. We're not big fans of that man, and he has not served the UK well. So I can understand it, and I can say things about him, but I won't bother.
Number 10 said it had privately told the White House that the memos did not reflect the government's views and their publication was regrettable. The Foreign Secretary echoed that at a press conference.
Of course, I made it clear that I don't share the Ambassador's assessment of either the US administration or relations with the US administration. But I do defend his right to make that frank assessment, and it's very important that our diplomats all over the world continue to be able to do so.
President Trump meeting Sir Kim Darroch on the state visit last month. One MP said he wanted the police to investigate the leak.
I have today written to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to ask that a criminal investigation also be opened into the leak.
One pro-Brexit Tory attacked Sir Kim Darroch.
Surely it is not his so-called frankness which should be the issue, but his lack of judgment which disqualifies him from his post.
I regret to have to say that I consider my honourable friend's intervention deeply unworthy. He is a diplomat of calibre and of integrity. Nothing in his reporting from the embassy could ever be construed as an attack on the President of the United States. All of it was reporting of the highest quality.
The government suggested a third country was not suspected of being behind the leak of Kim Darroch's letters home.
I think you've met.
We united Jonathan and Charles Powell, the brothers who advised Tony Blair and Margaret Thatcher on foreign policy, for this week's Politics Where Next podcast. Was the government right to rule out a third country's involvement?
Well, it crossed my mind, certainly. I first thought this was a sort of WikiLeaks type of thing and maybe involving the Russians. But if the government said that, they probably have reason to think it, in which case they may have a pretty good idea of who the leaker is. In my experience, I don't know whether Jonathan feels the same, leak inquiry is a complete waste of time because everyone knows who leaks it, but no one can ever prove it.
There have been a whole series of attacks on civil servants, on the Cabinet Secretary, on the former negotiator on the EU, all of a part by Farage and people from the Brexit side who seem to be keen to get rid of these people, and that's what I think it's about.
Boris Johnson's plans to hug the Trump administration close now look incompatible with Kim Darroch staying in his job. An end result some close to Mr Johnson will be only too pleased to see.
Well, joining me now is the chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, Conservative MP Tom Tugendhat from the House of Commons, and with me in the studio, the chairman of the Brexit Party, MEP Richard Tice. Tom Tugendhat first. Is calling the US president inept, insecure and incompetent the work of a great diplomat, do you think?
Well, reporting on the situation as he finds it without fear or favour, not attempting to suck up to a foreign administration, and reporting back to the government that sent him and that pays his bills is exactly the work of a diplomat. That is half the job. The other half of the job is promoting and soft-soaping and and attempting to influence the administration that he's dealing with abroad.
Right.
But reporting honestly is absolutely fundamental. If a diplomat doesn't do that, frankly, there's no point in having them.
Richard Tice, honest reporting.
Look, I mean, the reality is, how can he retain any credibility whatsoever to continue in his job, given that he's basically humiliated and embarrassed us with our most important trading and security partner? I mean, I find it's astonishing.
Honest, unvarnished reporting.
Excuse me, he accused the President of the United States of being indebted to dodgy Russians. He said he could never be seen as being competent. That is not unvarnished reporting. That is a subjective judgment based on someone who is clearly... It is true.
No, it's not true. What he was doing is he was reporting what others said. That's quite different from saying that he had said it.
No,
he was reporting that it was gossip in Washington around at the time. That's what he was reporting. And it was gossip around in Washington at the time. It may have been false, it may have been untrue, but it was gossip around in Washington at the time. That is correct.
It's not. Look, the reality is he accused this president that he would never be competent. And he's humiliated and embarrassed us in front, on the global stage. How can he retain his post? How can ministers truly say that they've got confidence in him when clearly he's got zero credibility? The man should have offered his resignation as soon as this came out.
Tom Tugendhat, is he unable to do his job now that Donald Trump has reacted so strongly?
Well, first of all, I don't think Donald Trump has reacted particularly strongly. And secondly, after the WikiLeaks incident in 2011, when we read what American diplomats were saying about the UK, I think that we're in a very good position of saying, look, we know what diplomats do. Diplomats report honestly on behalf of their government to their capitals about the situations they find themselves in. And that's not surprising. That is, after all, the job of a diplomat. And several of the US diplomats in that period reported extremely rudely about several of the ministers who are still in cabinet today. One or two of them are still in cabinet today. So, we took it on the chin, knew that this was what diplomats did, and recognised that, that's just life. And I'm afraid if you're a grown-up country and you're a grown-up civilization, you're used to dealing with free press and free interaction, then I'm afraid this is what you should be used to. If you want to act like a child, of course, you can throw a fit and walk away.
Well, look, the reality is, this is an experienced diplomat who knew that his emails would be seen by dozens, if not hundreds of people. And when you write an email, you've got to think, what would this look like if actually it came out?
Sorry, these are not emails. These are private communications between an envoy of Her Majesty's government to Her Majesty's government.
That are distributed.
This is not gossip. They are not distributed widely.
These are cables that are distributed widely throughout the civil service.
That's not true.
It is true. It's over 100
Richard,
people
that's
seen.
not true. That's not true. The dip-tells, which are the widely distributed ones, are not the ones that contain what you think is salacious
This
gossip.
was not the most highest level of security, was it, Tom?
It wasn't. Was it, Tom? The letters that went to the Cabinet Secretary and that went to the Defence Secretary, the Foreign Secretary and others would have been seen by only tens of people, maybe 5 or 10 people. And the very fact that this is so incredibly unusual tells you how reliable our system used to be. And the very fact that this is being so politicised and that our civil service is being drawn in this way into political game playing by cheap politicians is absolutely outrageous. It's a complete disgrace.
It is a disgrace that this man has not offered his resignation, given that he's embarrassed and humiliated our nation, and he should go.
Have you got an ulterior motive here? Because Nigel Farage
Yes, absolutely, I've got an ulterior motive. I want an ambassador in Washington promoting a post-Brexit Britain, helping to negotiate a free trade deal. This ambassador, this embassy has been not very successful in that, and the sooner he goes, I would like to have a business person doing it, which is...
What about you?
Well, let's see.
Would you like to be
I'm chairman of the Brexit Party. I tell you what, I think I could do a substantially better job than, frankly, Kim Darroch has done in promoting a post-Brexit Britain, the opportunities, and promoting a free trade deal. He has woefully failed us, and he should go.
Tom Tugendhat, how do you feel about the prospect of Nigel Farage, or indeed Richard Tice, in the embassy in Washington?
Well, I don't think there's much question about that, so I don't see any point in commenting on it. I think what's much better to focus on is the very fact that we've got a very serious problem in a culture of leaking in our country at the moment. We've had two major leaks in the last year, and frankly, both of them are completely unacceptable. We need to get the police involved.
How is a police inquiry, Tom, going to help promoting a post-Brexit Britain with our most important trading and security partner? That is much more important than an inquiry into a few cables and emails.
I think what's incredibly important is not the relationship or the potential damage to the relationship with the United States, which, as we've seen, is very deep and very strong. But much more important than that is the ability of British envoys, whether they be civilian or military, to know that the communications they have with Her Majesty's government are treated in the way that they should. Because if they do not communicate openly, freely and frankly with the unvarnished truth that is absolutely necessary, then you have policymakers in Westminster making decisions based on false information, gossip or hearsay, rather than on the actual detailed knowledge of commanders. And I've heard that from military officers today.
OK, is the problem in the Conservative Party, might Boris Johnson's team be behind this leak, do you think?
I doubt that enormously. I suspect that this is the work of somebody rather foolish, who is cavalier and entirely selfish.
The truth is, the Conservative Party, they are focusing on they're focusing not on the right thing. They're focusing on who leaked it. What they need to focus on is actually who is the right person now to lead our embassy in the United States as we move forward under a new Prime Minister.
Why might the pro-Brexit journalist Isabel Oakeshott have got her hands on these emails, these leaks,
no
do
idea.
you think?
I've no idea at all. I think it's fair to say that the civil service is widely known as being massively pro-Remain. Many senior servants have been trying to stop Brexit, and I suspect that there are a small number of civil servants who are actually pro-Brexit, and they're trying to sort of even the score. Maybe that's how this has come out. I don't know.
Is it really credible that the civil service would leak this?
Where else does it come from?
Tom Tugendhat?
I'm not going to speculate as to who may or may not have leaked things like this, but I do think that politicising people who execute the orders of elected representatives is a little silly. I think what we should focus on is why orders haven't been given clearly enough, or maybe why individuals aren't being given the instructions they require. But the idea that somebody who is ordered to go to Brussels, for example, and promotes Britain's interest in Brussels, is then criticised as being pro or anti-European. It's nothing to do with that. That's their job. That's exactly what they're paid to do.
Just moving, while we've got you in here, just moving on to a slightly different subject. A European Parliament committee recommended, quote, the harshest penalty after Nigel Farage failed to declare £450,000 worth of donations
What's that got to do with this
from
matter
Aaron
of state
Banks
to do with our relations? I'm sorry.
I just wondered if you were worried about that.
This is utter nonsense, typically brought up by Channel 4. We're talking about a serious matter of state with our most important trading partner, and for you to cheapen this interview in that way is ridiculous.
The European Union is our most important
Our biggest single trading partner, Tom, is the United States. They're our biggest, most important security partner, and they're our biggest single foreign direct investor into this country.
It's a rather serious matter, though, isn't it, that Nigel Farage has been found in breach of European Parliament rules?
Look, that's a matter for Mr Farage and the European Union.
Are you worried about it, though, the
It's
penalties?
got nothing to do with this interview about our most important relationship and whether or not the US ambassador should retain his position. And in my view,
sorry, Woody
he shouldn't.
Johnson's doing a very good job. I just see no reason why you should call his name
I'm talking about the UK ambassador in Washington. I'm so sorry, Tom.
Is it right, though, that elected politicians get sizable donations from very rich businessmen and don't declare them? Is that right?
That's got nothing to do with what we talk about. We're talking about...
Well, I'm talking about this.
Well, I'm talking about our most important trading relationship.
We've had a good chat about that. I want to just
That's a matter
ask
for
this
Mr Farage.
question.
You know, we're talking about here leaks for the US and the UK trading relationship, and that is much more important than a few scurrilous allegations from Channel 4 against a member of the European Parliament.
Richard Tice, Tom Tugendhat, thank you very much for joining us.
Not long ago, Theresa May asked the Queen to invite President Trump here for a full state visit with all the attendant pomp and ceremony. It seemed to go pretty well, and tonight he delivered a resounding vote of thanks to our departing Prime Minister as only he knows how. She had not listened to his advice on Brexit, he said, and consequently made a mess of it. And after those leaked messages from our ambassador to Washington, Mr Trump doesn't think he can do business with him either. But there was some good news, he added. Britain would soon have a new Prime Minister.
In the last hour, the President has been at the White House talking about the environment, making no further comment on Britain. But this was just minutes after he had provoked a major diplomatic storm by pouring scorn on Theresa May and humiliating our ambassador to Washington. The context, of course, is that Britain has spent 2.5 years courting this president, using charm and flattery from the very beginning.
Well, thank you, Mr. President.
Hoping it would pay diplomatic dividends. Instead, in 2 tweets tonight, Trump has made that strategy look absurd. I have been very critical about the way the UK and Prime Minister Theresa May handled Brexit, he tweeted, adding, "What a mess she and her representatives have created. I told her how it should be done, but she decided to go another way. I do not know the ambassador, but he is not liked or well thought of within the US. We will no longer deal with him. The good news for the wonderful United Kingdom is that they will soon have a new Prime Minister. While I thoroughly enjoyed the magnificent state visit last month, it was the Queen who I was most impressed with." The crisis in the bilateral relationship was triggered by the leaking of Sir Kim Darroch's unflattering but unsurprising analysis. He called the White House dysfunctional, warned the Foreign Office and Number 10 that the administration will remain unpredictable, and he described the Trump team, perhaps rather charitably, as diplomatically clumsy and inept. No one is underestimating the damage this leak is doing to the special relationship and indeed to the practice of diplomacy.
It's very unprofessional. It puts the ambassador in an impossible position, and it is a huge disincentive to other ambassadors to do their job properly and tell ministers what they really think.
The idea that a month after a high-profile state visit, the President of the US is attacking the Prime Minister and refusing to talk to the British ambassador is extraordinary. The closest of alliances, suddenly looking very rocky indeed. One big diplomatic issue tonight is whether Sir Kim Darroch will be removed from his post, given Trump's vow not to deal with him. But can Britain be seen to be bullied by a president? Another issue is who will succeed him, a professional diplomat or a Brexit-supporting political appointee. All tough choices for the incoming British Prime Minister. Robert Moore, News at 10, Washington.
OK, well, that does lead us naturally on to the leak of our ambassador's somewhat punchy assessments of the US president. It is standard procedure in such a case for the government to launch a mole hunt, but the search for who passed all those diplomatic cables to the Mail on Sunday could reveal more about our politicians than our civil servants. The Prime Minister says she has full faith in him. So who has the most to gain from undermining Sir Kim Darroch? One answer might be someone who wants a more pro-Trump ambassador to replace him.
Just a month since his state visit, and President Trump's no longer willing to shake the hand of this man.
Hi, Mr. President. Hope it's going well.
Hope the visit's going well, says our ambassador. It had done until now. This morning, the man in charge of our foreign relations was already having to defend the diplomat who may have damaged them.
Do you really think it's tenable to keep Sir Kim Darroch in his role? Isn't the only way to repair the damage done to replace him?
It's very important that our ambassadors and high commissioners around the world continue to feel that they are able to express those frank views.
But those views weren't supposed to be leaked. Some were contained in diplomatic telegrams or diptels, factual updates sent to up to 1,000 ministers and officials. Others were from more analytical letters, seen by around 10 senior figures. The emails date from 2017, covering infighting in the White House all the way up to 3 weeks ago, describing an incoherent and chaotic policy on Iran. But I understand emails here at the Foreign Office are automatically deleted after 3 months, meaning whoever leaked the earlier ones had to have been carefully setting them aside, with an official inquiry now underway, not into what Sir Kim said, but how we know he said it.
Boris, do you know the cables?
There is speculation that some here want a new Prime Minister to appoint a new ambassador, perhaps a diplomat who shares Boris Johnson's views on Brexit.
Urgent question.
Catching the culprit will require some detective work, and some think that should involve the police.
And while I understand that the Foreign Office has opened an inquiry into this leak, I have today written to the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police to ask that a criminal investigation also be opened into the leak.
So just a month after this display was meant to impress the President, now the spectacle of an inquiry into leaks, which certainly haven't. Paul Brand, News at 10.
And Robert is, of course, here. Who do you think leaked these cables and why?
OK, so I've been speaking to senior government officials, senior politicians. Most people are scratching their heads, partly because whenever you get a new Prime Minister, you do get a reset of who does a whole variety of important jobs, not just in the cabinet, but also in the Foreign Office and the Civil Service. And, you know, Kim Darroch was going to go at the end of the year in any case. Now, what's happened is a grotesque embarrassment for him and for the government. I think the Prime Minister will back him, and I think that the new Prime Minister will probably have to back him because, you know, he's going on holiday over the summer, and then broadly the relationship with the US will be run out of London till he goes at the end of the year. So you've always got to look for cui bono, who benefits when there is an anonymous offence of this sort. Frankly, about the only person who I think is genuinely whooping for joy at the moment is President Putin of Russia, who must be really enjoying the spectacle of, you know, the American president having a go at Theresa May. Now, you know, this may surprise you, but when I put to those senior officials and politicians that this could be a Russian hack, none of them have actually tried to talk me out of it. Now, they don't know. An inquiry is going on, but this was not top secret stuff. And, you know, people with a knowledge of this sort of thing say, actually, this is within the capability of a Russian hack. So we'll have to wait and see, but this is the stuff... Actually, let's be clear, it's probably the stuff of your latest novel.
Oh, no, OK, let's not promote that. It's a very... that's a theory I haven't heard, but very
a theory that you've written a very good book about, the rising...
Right, now, let's move on.
Just 1 month ago, the US president was being feted by Her Majesty the Queen. The red carpet literally rolled out. A white tie banquet, the full royal family in tow. Tonight, the special relationship is looking rather more precarious. Donald Trump has unceremoniously dumped our man in Washington, Sir Kim Darroch, declaring by tweet he'll no longer deal with him. The remarks come after leaks to a Sunday paper which relayed private, intimate briefings by the ambassador to his own government. There was no whistle blown, no public interest fed, there was no grand revelation. There was no, in other words, anything really learnt. The aim of the latest leak, it's presumed, was to embarrass the diplomat at the centre and, by implication, the broader Whitehall establishment. So what should our government do? Stand by our man or start all over? And a dirty trick's now dictating the rules of engagement. Here's our political editor, Nick Watt.
A moment of triumph all round. A restless US president in his element as he was indulged by the Queen.
I'm delighted to welcome you and Mrs. Trump to Buckingham Palace this evening.
Donald Trump had been dazzled by his state visit, Britain's ambassador crowed afterwards. Sadly, diplomacy is a fickle beast, and just a month later, Her Majesty's envoy is now persona non grata in Washington after his favourable and not so favourable thoughts were leaked. A win for the leaker after Donald Trump declared this evening his administration would now have nothing to do with Sir Kim Darroch.
I have been very critical about the way the UK and Prime Minister Theresa May handled Brexit. What a mess she and her representatives have created. I told her how it should be done, but she decided to go another way. I do not know the ambassador, but he is not liked or well thought of within the US. We will no longer deal with him. The good news for the wonderful United Kingdom is that they will soon have a new Prime Minister. While I thoroughly enjoyed the magnificent state visit last month, it was the Queen who I was most impressed with.
I think this is a significant escalation. He could have let it go from the tweet earlier today and yesterday to the one today, which takes it up a notch, and it basically puts Kim Darroch almost on garden leave in Washington. Why? I think it's for leverage. Everything for Donald Trump is leverage. He thinks this will give him a little bit more opportunity to push the next Prime Minister, probably Boris Johnson, to have to back his agenda, because how are you going to make me happy again? How are you going to make me feel that I can trust you? For Boris Johnson, this is a big problem.
There will be dismay in Downing Street that the leaker will feel they've succeeded in their mission. One ally of the Prime Minister spoke of malicious intent in the mind of the leaker, who has used their ringside seat in the heart of government to hoard Sir Kim Darroch's cables over 2 years before releasing the highly sensitive documents.
Leaking has become something of a habit in Whitehall. In recent months, details from Theresa May's cabinet meetings have been aired in public. The man charged with promoting the nation's armed forces was sacked for allegedly leaking confidential discussions, and senior civil servants recently mused about Jeremy Corbyn's fitness for office.
Well, I think we've seen far more leaks and far more unhelpful briefings than anybody in the civil service can be happy with. I'm not sure yet whether there's a pattern, to be honest. They all look individually different. But maybe, just maybe, they're part of a wider breakdown of the system given the pressures of Brexit. It is imposing intolerable pressure, in my view, on the whole civil service and indeed on Whitehall.
Of course it's worrying.
A defence minister is gloomy.
It's very clear that we're going through very difficult and testing times, and this leak is just another one of those issues that is challenging Parliament, the government and indeed the nation, not least because of Brexit. And now we're having to choose a new Prime Minister as well. The sooner that Prime Minister is in situ, able to reinstall discipline, give clarity and direction of where we need to go, the better.
I think this is partly about Brexit and the volatility in politics at the moment, and the high sort of octane atmosphere out there, and also the fervour of opinions. This is really polarised opinions yet again. But I think it's also, though, about, yes, the end of a government, the end of a Prime Minister.
So soon we'll have a new Prime Minister with new authority, but if they end up going down the no-deal route, do you think there'll be civil servants, ministers, maybe ex-ministers, who'll feel so strongly that they'll want documents out there in the public domain?
Normally when a new Prime Minister takes over, they've got a sort of grace period where they're in the ascendancy, they're quite strong politically, and it takes time for that power to ebb away. I think given the circumstances that we're in, given the parliamentary arithmetic, that grace period will be much shorter for the next Prime Minister, and that probably means that yes, people will be looking for what's the sort of key facts that I want to get out there, what are the arguments that I want to make, and I'm sure that leaking will be part of that.
Washington, a city of intrigue where careers are made and broken. In that endless power game, Britain's ambassador is the loser.
That was Nick Watt reporting. We're joined by our diplomatic editor, Mark Urban. I'm trying to think if we've seen anything like this before, Mark, and I have to say nothing springs to mind.
Short answer, no. I mean, look, there have been all manner of testy diplomatic relationships over the decades. Ambassadors who were basically non-functional because the governments of the countries they were in just despised them or despised the UK position. That is not an unusual situation. It's not an unusual situation for them to express privately very rude views in their telegrams home. WikiLeaks in 2010 had a whole raft of those from US ambassadors about all sorts of people, including British politicians. But clearly this is an unprecedented situation in the sense of a president tweeting this about a UK ambassador. It's very tricky. Downing Street tonight have put out a statement saying, look, the leaked telegrams from Sir Kim Darroch don't reflect the closeness and the breadth of the relationship, and that they continue to stand by him. That's where we are. It's an extremely difficult situation. We'll have to see where they take it from here.
Well, in terms of how they should handle this now, I mean, you don't want to give too much credence to whoever's presumably doing the leaking.
Well, no. And look, there are theories. I mean, Jeremy Hunt being quoted in The Sun tonight saying one line of inquiry is that the Russians hacked these documents and have leaked them to sow dissension between two close allies. That could be one theory. Other people obviously go with the idea that it's a political supporter of someone or other who wants to shape the climate. But look, the situation is, as Talleyrand, the great French diplomat, once said, the art of statesmanship is to predict the inevitable and hasten its occurrence. Now, you might say, well, it is inevitable that Kim Darroch will go. He always said he'd go at the end of this year. Maybe he's got a lot of leave that hasn't been taken, various other things that could slightly expedite that process. But there is a problem here for HMG, which is, of course, being seen to do this by presidential tweet, effectively. Yeah. Some people will say, no, we have to keep him in place for a while longer now, simply to show that we can't be dictated to in that way.
Mark, thanks very much. With us now, Kim Darroch's predecessor in Washington, Sir Peter Westmacott, who was Britain's ambassador to the US between 2012 and 2016, Sir Craig Oliver, who knows the inner machinations of government from his time at Number 10. Nice to see you both. Sir Peter, if the US president refuses to deal with Britain's ambassador, what happens?
We're talking about a presidential tweet. and it's a remark which is rude about Kim, but it's also rude about the Prime Minister. This is a president who's got a bit of a habit of lashing out against people who have irritated him, got under his skin or whatever. It doesn't necessarily mean that that is going to be US policy for the days, the weeks, the months that follow. Nevertheless, this is pretty unprecedented. I suspect that he was irritated by the fact that ministers came out, including the Prime Minister, and said, we back our ambassador, he's doing his job, even if we disagree with the content of the reports which have been leaked. But I would say that if the president refuses to deal with the ambassador, in the real world you don't see an ambassador-president meetings that often, but it would put him in a very difficult position. At the same time, I would just say this, that you only bring an ambassador out or expel an ambassador when something very serious has gone wrong between two countries and not two close friends and allies. It would be pretty unprecedented for the idea that the President of the United States should push the man out simply for doing his job, and because somebody has leaked what he wrote in confidence.
So our PM just has to ignore this?
Well,
carry on as if he hasn't said anything?
This is a very, very important relationship for Number 10 and for the United Kingdom. I think ignore it is probably difficult, but I would have thought there would be some active private diplomacy, as there already has been messaging saying we don't agree with what he says, but we defend his right to say what he has said. But I think this has got to be calmed down and hopefully move on from an irritated tweet provoked by whatever it is, perhaps the statement from Number 10, and get on with life, because it is, as you said earlier, just a month since we had a hugely successful state visit. The relationship between Britain and the United States is very important and very substantial and in very good shape.
But at the moment, President Trump's tweet plays into the hands of the leaker. I mean, do you see any collusion there? Do you think a circle has been completed with what has happened tonight?
Well, it's another reason why Kim should be allowed to continue his tour of duty till its natural end, which is in a few months' time. He's due to go at the end of the year anyway. So to validate, if you like, the leaker's activity by somehow driving him out would be intolerable, in my view. Do I see any evidence of collusion? I don't see any at all. I've assumed that this is about some sort of jockeying for position within the mess, I'm afraid, that is British politics at the moment over the succession. You know, we're going to have a new Prime Minister. There are people who think that we should have somebody who's an unconditional Trump supporter and an unconditional Brexiteer doing that job. I would argue that the tradition that the United Kingdom has of having somebody who is a balanced professional diplomat is one that is worth maintaining. But of course the Prime Minister
unless they don't think
can
that
choose
he's
whoever they
balanced,
like.
unless they do think that actually the civil service has become too sort of unencouraging, shall we say,
Yes.
towards Brexit and Trump in general, if that is something that they feel that the establishment has got wrong.
I agree with that, but of course Brexit is not going to be negotiated in Washington. Free trade agreements hopefully will be, but as I and others have said for a long time, they take years to negotiate. And let's be honest, the relationship which Kim Darroch's embassy in Washington has managed with the Trump administration leading up to the state visit and a whole series of other things, despite a number of significant policy differences, has been a very good relationship.
I mean, it sounds like you don't think it's Russia, from what you're saying. Are you sort of acknowledging that perhaps the civil service has erred to one side too much?
No, I wouldn't say that. I do believe that in the polarised political atmosphere we have in this country at the moment, that there is a sense that some of the civil service don't really get with the programme and don't want Brexit to happen. They certainly don't want no-deal Brexit. That is true, but that is not the same thing as saying that there is politicisation of the civil service. But I think some people probably think that process has been going on and want to stop it and want to have people who are like-minded in these traditionally non-political positions in the civil service and the diplomatic service.
So, Craig, help us get to the bottom of who could be behind this now. How many people would have had access to the kind of information that we saw leaked?
Well, Alan Duncan was talking in the House of Commons this afternoon, and he suggested about 100 people would have had access to some of these diplomatic telegrams. And I can certainly believe that. I think the reality is once you get to the senior civil servants and you get to the senior ministers who are going to see it, and then it mushrooms from there because they're capable of showing it to other people and that kind of thing. Whoever has done it has taken very great care across a couple of years to do it, to fillet the juiciest bits from these diplomatic telegrams, package them up and hand them over to a journalist. I suspect it's going to be quite hard to find out who that person is, because if they've taken that degree of care over packaging them up, they presumably got the nous to actually cover their tracks.
So this is not something that a police inquiry could uncover? Is it all?
Well, potentially it could. I mean, when I was in Number 10, we had a situation where a Liberal Democrat SPAD literally used his office telephone to ring somebody and leak a piece of information, and it was the shortest leak inquiry in history.
He had it easy.
Because he'd literally done it on his office telephone. Now, what you've got to avoid in these circumstances, if you are a leaker, is leaving any kind of trail of breadcrumbs that leads back to you. And what would happen in an inquiry is that they would go to all the people who are possibly suspected. They would say, look, right, we want to see all your emails, we want to see your personal phone, we want to see your work phone, we want to see your office phone, and they would go through all of those things. So when Gavin Williamson got himself into trouble over the NEC thing, although he denies leaking, he had an 11-minute phone conversation, which was clear from his phone records, and people said, look, there's circumstantial evidence here.
I mean, what was interesting was looking at the point Nick made, this is not out of nowhere. This feels like it's becoming part of our culture now. Is government broken in the sense that real work of government can no longer be done securely?
We are in an extraordinarily volatile time in terms of politics, and have been for some time, but it's getting worse. We're reaching a peak now. You're literally switching a prime minister. And the other thing is it's become incredibly tribal. You're seeing some people on Twitter tonight suggesting that this is effectively a punishment beating for a civil service that has become too Brexity. That is an extraordinary state of affairs that people are even considering that as a possibility of this happening.
I would add one point to what Craig's just said. Some of those diplomatic cables which would have been sent by the embassy in Washington would indeed have been seen by hundreds of people. But the more sensitive stuff, in other words, the ambassador's personal judgment about the longevity of the Trump administration and will it, won't it change, that would have been written as a letter addressed to an individual, copied to a small number of other individuals. Probably not more than half a dozen, perhaps 10 or 12. It ought not to be too difficult for a leak inquiry to discover who had that and who has shared it with other unauthorised people.
If this was you, you must have written this sort of stuff down when you were ambassador.
I certainly wrote material to Number 10, to very senior people in the Prime Minister's office, a very limited distribution.
Would you do it
which
still?
was very sensitive, and which was specifically a letter, not a cable, so it didn't go all around the houses and all around the world. And I made it very clear to those concerned that this was highly sensitive and very personal, and my individual judgment. I was fortunate. Nobody leaked it.
But would you, if you were the ambassador now, would you still feel confident in writing down your views?
Well, I think after what has happened now, and given the political background against which the political musical chairs are taking place, who's going to get which job after Boris becomes Prime Minister, if he does, I would right now be extremely wary about committing to paper anything that I thought that was remotely sensitive. And that is one of the reasons why this is a terribly bad thing to have done. If ambassadors and other senior government servants no longer feel able to say what they think, put it down in writing for the Prime Minister, other senior ministers, we are no longer able to do our jobs.
If this has been a leak and isn't foreign intelligence service who's hacked, but if it is a leak from government, and that looks most likely, then it is an extraordinary act of vandalism, I think, to have done this, and whoever has done it has probably not really thought through the implications of it, because it means that very, very trusted senior people in the diplomatic service will not give their best advice and will be extremely nervous. And I think that Sir Peter's right in the sense that when he was around, there was much more discipline in terms of the distribution list. People are looser in this government about who they share that with and pass that on.
So with a new Brexit PM, can this then be sorted? Is the slate wiped clean, or has the culture of leaking, do you think, just taken root?
Well, I think you end up in a situation where people start feeling what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander, and that you end up in a situation where the other tribe feels that they perhaps want to start doing this kind of thing. It's very difficult. We don't know who's done it, but you end up in a situation where trust goes, and when trust goes, it's an extraordinarily difficult situation for any government. And I think that that's what Brexit's done. It's created a tribal system where people are trying to prove each other wrong to an extraordinary degree.
Thank you both very much indeed.